Alright, so I'm going to make this as short and sweet as possible because I'm short on time, I'm horrible at making videos, and no matter how many times I try, I can't stop looking away from the camera when I'm talking. And no matter what I do, I just keep looking at the tip of these cables. So, anyways, the reason I'm here to talk about these is I recently started selling these, and I will be shipping out my first batch of 10 of them this week. And my background, a short summary is I have a 93 CB Accord. I've had it since 2008. It's seen a few different parts on it. I decided to build an all-wheel drive time attack monster for Pikes Peak that basically took my children's college tuition away, and they're not even born yet. But hey, dream big, right? So a big issue that I found is finding good shift cables that are available for the CB Accord. There are some companies that make aftermarket cables. There is one who's been doing it for a long time, and a lot of people have used them. There's one that's a little bit newer, but doesn't support the stuff older than a K series. And so, for those of us with, H's and B's, there's only a few options we have for really nice shifter upgrades. And what I've noticed in this industry is people like to make really shiny stuff that's really cool to sell it, regardless of if it's a performance upgrade. And that's kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So I just started making my own stuff. People said, hey, that's cool. Can you make it for me? And, a few months of that, I started my own business. Lo and behold, it's about exactly a year later. I've launched a couple products, but I've got about 6 or 7 that are 90% done. And so nobody knows who I am. And so outside of the CB community, I'm like, hey, here's these $450 cables. You guys should buy them. They're awesome. And everybody looks at me and like, who the heck are you? I don't know who you are. You don't even have like a running Honda. Well, the streetcar runs. I have 2 identical Accords. One is a Pikes Peak all-wheel drive track monster with 315s and a twin-charged H22 with ITBs and rear steering and cantilever suspension. And then I have a streetcar that's going to stay CB, but I'm going to go through the entire chassis and build track-oriented performance parts for it. And so running the alternative competitive cables for years and having issues, and these issues are consistent. I've heard from a lot of people these same issues. And now that I'm trying to sell these, people are now comparing me to that same cable. And they're like, hey, yours are 450, theirs are 400, they've been around for 10 years, and theirs are awesome. So why would I buy yours? I don't know who you are. And that's fair and understandable. I was an OEM, still am, and well, I'm a supplier now, but I was an OEM engineer for, 11 years, and now I've been a supplier for almost 2. And my specialty is vehicle dynamics, and I have a master's degree in engineering focused in vehicle dynamics. I've probably tuned thousands of valve codes and put probably close to 60 valve codes into production. So like I've tuned 60 dampers, like the shim, like everything that goes inside of it on 30 production variants, which would be, a front set and a rear set, so about 60. And each one of those valve codes gets probably 50 to 70 tuning iterations. So that's a lot of driving around with the stereo off, feeling things. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I used to get paid a lot of money to be a human accelerometer, to, drive a car like a Grand Cherokee down the road, which is big, heavy, and has bubbly tires, and feel whether the bands in the tires that lay across each other need to be like angled half a degree more. Maybe we need to throw a little more nylon in the tire. And so I'm pretty sensitive to feel. And so now that I'm getting back into building cars after kind of a hiatus, my preference for quality, let's say, is different. And so I built these, and they're awesome. And people are like, I don't know you, I don't know these, why the heck would I buy them? You like how I made this short and sweet? So I'm just going to do an objective product evaluation. I'm going to try to stay as objective as possible. Cognitive dissonance is a disease, but I'm going to do my best. And so we're going to go over the metrics that I consider if I were to ask you, hey, how do these cables do? You know, like when someone goes online and they're like, hey, what do you guys think about this? You get 20 responses. I've had them on my car for 2 years or 5 years, and they're great, and they're awesome, or whatever. But it doesn't actually say anything about the product. It's someone's opinion, and you have no idea if that's an accurate, knowledgeable opinion or not. And so I'm going to break it down functionally. So function. Trans fitment. How well does the shift post package on the transmission? How well does the shift post package on the shift lever? How does it fit in the engine bay packaging? And some of you guys who have bought this other product before will understand why that's important. Bend radius, that's a big one. So look at that. Still works. These things are great. Efficiency and lash. So most people don't know about this. If you take a cable end to end and you push on it, guess what? It goes the other side, moves exactly the same as this side. However, some of the quality comes into play when you do this. And so the industry standard for this is you turn the cable 270 degrees. Some companies, because they're a little more realistic, will also post 270 degree data. Or, yeah, I've only seen 360 and 270. And so what happens when you rotate this is, imagine the conduit and the inner liner are there's a perfect interference fit, and it's very low friction. And so the cable will just move. It's kind of like a brake line. If you push on one side, the fluid will displace. There's nowhere for the fluid to go, so it will push on the other side. But where the quality comes into play is lower quality components don't have that same tolerance. In some components that are meant for, I don't know, tractors where it's just on off, they don't put much effort into that at all, because why would you care on an old tractor, right? And so what happens is the cable is a slightly smaller outer diameter than the inner diameter of this conduit sleeve. And so when you push on this, it has to push to the outside radius instead of being perfectly coaxial. And what'll happen is you'll get lash. As you can see, these don't have any. What goes in comes out, even completely spun around. So that's pretty good. Friction. That's a double-edged sword. A lot of friction is bad. Alternatively, no friction doesn't feel great. In the industry, we call it harshness, closer to trashiness. We actually use trashy. It's a technical dynamics term. It's high frequency content that lacks damping, and so it just feels low quality. And I can't think of a good analogy other than, you know, people say I have the tism. I'm going to say I don't. However, you give me a really nice bolt. Yeah. And a nut. Hold on one second. This is a very high quality, expensive nut and bolt. When I'm in the garage thinking, I will just sit here and spin these together. It's a little dirty, but they feel incredible. It's a very tight tolerance. It's a very smooth fit. So there is some friction. Like, I can't just spin it and it'll keep spinning. A loose nut will continue spinning, right? And so it feels good because it has a little bit of friction, but it doesn't have any stiction. All stiction is bad. unless you need it to hold position. But we're talking about shift cables, so that is not relevant in any way. What stiction is the friction is so high that I push and I have to get to a certain force before it breaks. And then I push and it breaks. And so you get like kind of this notchy feeling. And so stiction is not good. And without getting into biomechanics and stuff like that, what really matters is the ratio of stiction to friction. You can actually have a lot of stiction if you have a lot of friction. And short story is you end up with lower acceleration when that stiction breaks loose, and that lower acceleration is what feels better. Lastly, we have just the overall quality of the rod ends, and we have quality and functionality of the bulkheads. So now that I had a short and sweet intro, let's actually get to the data. All right, so to go over the trans-side fit, we'll start with mine because they're already installed. So what we have, this is a carbon fiber high temp nylon. It's good to about 480 degrees. So it will not melt, just like, you know, the ABS under your hood doesn't melt. So these will hold up pretty good. And they're insanely strong. And so what I've done here is, you know, if you guys follow YouTube videos, there's certain someone who was racing at Grid Life and almost placed first his first time, and then his cable clip fell off. And so what these are kind of a positive engagement locking setup. So you just slide them in like a normal bulkhead, but then they lock into place. And do not require tools or you to bust your knuckles when it breaks loose. And this pin simply prevents the cap from popping off. Easy to take on and off, right? And they're tight. They're in there. Okay, so everything looks like it fits pretty good, right? We've got just these bulkhead adapters, so it works with the factory transmission. We have full range of motion. And as you can see, there's an extra 1/4 inch there that we can plunge if we want to. And so the cable on the transmission side is perfectly centered. So if we come over here, we've got about a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch that way. And if we go here, we've got about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch here. So on this transmission side, it's perfectly centered. And use a 2mm cotter pin to hold it in. As you can see, these rod ends are stainless and brass, so nothing will corrode. These cable ends are all stainless, nothing will corrode. And it's the same story over here with this one. It's brass and stainless, and we are centered around travel. If you can see without my hands being in the way. All right, so I'd say we package as good as anything can package, right? There's no improvements that could be made. The rod ends have sufficient travel, and they have sufficient over travel, equal in both directions. Now, as far as packaging, as you can see, they fit nicely. The bracket that holds the cables in place normally mounts right here. So you can mount them up. And we've got a really good fit. Alright, so now I've got the other cables mounted in the car. And it's kind of a complicated situation. And this is part of the issue I had when I first tried to run these when I bought them back in, I think, 2015. So a couple things. This side fits up okay. No issues here. You can see the slop that it has. And it needs to have that because there is some slight plane changes. So it needs to, otherwise it'll bind. As far as travel centering, that's as far as the shifter will go, or the cables. So I'd say we're pretty good. You know, if we go all the way back, we got, well, actually that's like an 1/8 inch of clearance. So you could make it longer if you wanted to, but it kind of causes issues on the other end. So we'll just throw it on because I got it working. There are 2 issues with this one. One issue is, instead of making this 19 millimeters thick, they made it 20 millimeters thick. And because it's 20 millimeters thick, you can't fit a standard 2 millimeter cotter pin through the hole. So you got to use this little guy. Is it an issue? Probably not. I've never heard of anybody having issues with these. There's no thrust loads in the axial direction, so it shouldn't really cause any issues whatsoever. But the other issue that I have is this. Well, for one, it doesn't matter on this end, but these are kind of flimsy. But here's the travel that we have. So this is center position. That's fully out, so that's not bad. That's about where mine are. There's an extra 1/4 inch of travel, if you can see that. But then when you come to the other side, it technically won't rest at center. So the cable won't even go far enough in for the transmission to work. Now, it does work, but here's why. So once it's installed, and you push this back, the spring in the trans will hold it in place. And so if I barely put it over center, it kind of wants to sit right there. And what is happening is it can't go fully back by about 1 millimeter. It's really not much. It's 1 mil or 2. But what this ends up doing, this is actually putting a slight load on the shift forks. You don't want that. And it's just simply because it won't plunge any deeper. And this has the shift posts in the furthest rearward position. So really, this needs to be able to go back another 1/2 inch. And then this rod needs to be a 1/2 inch longer. Well, the rod's probably fine, but this mount needs to go back another 1/2 inch. So you could get by this by spacing it out. You could probably put a spacer back there. And actually, I could probably just 3D print a carbon fiber nylon adapter, or not adapter, but just a spacer to push that back enough to take the load off this. So I would say these don't package great, because they don't. Like, you don't want your shift forks and your synchros to have pressure on them just from the shifter sitting there. It's not ideal. And then packaging in the car. This is a big headache a lot of other people have had to deal with. That extra length makes these guys go all over the engine bay, and they're really hard to fit when you have a completed car. It kind of sucks to get them to fit. The other thing you're missing out on is, this is a prototype, so it's PLA instead of carbon fiber. But this is a new chassis gasket seal that works with basically any cables, so that you don't have a bunch of wind noise. I like, completed synthesized products. So, all right, so now to show the packaging issue a little bit better, I have laid my cables down next to Accord cables. And something worth noting is it looks like these other competitor cables are just using a standard off-the-shelf length of about 60 inches. It shows up a little short because I have the rod ends totally sucked in. Trying to get them to fit. So if we come back down to this end, you can see the differences in length. So mine are 1 inch longer. And the reason for that is this is a common core cable that I use for other HF platforms, and then I just adapt the lengths of the rod ends and the bulkhead fittings to make everything fit. So from shifter to trans, we're 1 inch longer, but as you can see, these are, that's right around 8, and these are right around
11.5, so that's 3 inches longer, and this one is 6 inches longer. And for reference, what that ends up looking like is this jig is set up for stock Accord cables, and this is how much extra flex you get from 1 inch. So now imagine you have 6 inches of extra length. It's really going to bow out. Another thing is we'll compare the rod ends. So 91 CBs had plastic screw-on rod ends on both, which is what gave me the inspiration to use these. So these are just solid sphericals, no lash, basically negligible friction. And then we've got these guys. So they're not much lash. It is tight, but it does have a little bit of stiction because it's plastic. In this one, it doesn't need to be a spherical, as long as the tolerance is large enough. And so this is going to have a bigger hole than this. Not by much. You may not even be able to measure it, but it kind of shows up. So really, you're not gaining a ton of feel by using these. These are like an extra 5%. Most people don't care about the 5%, but I do. And then if we come here to the transmission side, it's a similar story. These are all stainless. Well, stainless and brass, but both rod ends are stainless and brass. Again, we have a plastic spherical, which you can wiggle around. It's not tight. And again, we just have another rod end there. So these aren't a bad design. They're very cost effective. But as you can see, there's kind of some bendy issues there.
All right, so based off that, I'm going to make the objective statement that they fit the transmission better than the competition. So as you can see, these cables are tight, but I basically want you to pay attention to the motion here. It's very smooth, it's not clunky, it feels nice and sharp. Mind you, this slop is in the transmission. That's just in the shift forks. And then same thing here. And that little bit of friction these cables has kind of gives it a good feeling when you go in between the gears. Now to get a better look here, there we go. So these are unique to the K-tuned, or the RSX shifter, sorry. What this bulkhead does is it pushes the cable away from the shifter so that this rod can be center of travel on the shifter. And it's the same thing here, I just didn't need it over here because the rod end on the other side is a little shorter and the geometry is different. But essentially, yeah, there's no binding. Everything fits, and that is my chassis gasket that I make, by the way. So it's a new seal that you can get, just not yet. I'm having some teething issues. And these rod ends are in the car, so they do not need to be completely rust-proof, and are just simply zinc-plated steel with steel balls. But they fit the RSX shifter perfectly, which is really nice. So yeah, they just work, and they package just as good with this CB shifter, which I also make a performance version of too. So when people try to shift these guys, this is what happens. The cable binds, and then you got to line it up and shove it back in, right? So now if we just like, it's really annoying. So like I can't even show you the shift feel. And they're not all like this. If everybody had this issue, nobody would buy these. However, it's a quality control issue because I know a lot of people who
will not use these in their race cars. So the noise isn't great, and it's kind of like that's too much, right? You don't want that. Now mine are really old, so maybe they've gotten better, but they don't look like it from the ones that I've seen online. So I would say that they probably don't package very well up here either. The lash sucks. The shift feel, like, it makes noise. That's because this bushing is got compliance in it. My short throws that I make, that's a stock one, but I have 0 compliance in my entire shifter. So with my shifter, it's even better than the lash that this guy has, just because this is a compliant ball joint. It shouldn't be, but it is. I suspect they did it to get this to work properly, so it's allowed to spring up and down. And then they also used a compliant joint in this to get it to work. And so it's just kind of clunky. And also there's no gasket seal there.
All right, so obviously the shifter fits a little bit better too. So we'll give it a point there. That's not 11 points or 2 points, it's just 1. The engine bay packaging, also a little bit better. All right, this isn't super scientific because I'm going off feel, so I guess I'm being not perfectly objective. But this is about the most force I feel comfortable putting on these cables. Is about there. And we are spread about 7.5 inches across. I think these are rated for a 5-inch, so I can pull a little tighter. Yeah, I think they're rated for a 5-inch minimum bend radius. What's nice is I actually have a technical data sheet that I can work off and properly engineer these components, instead of just making assumptions and saying good enough. These look pretty similar, right? Ooh, 6.5. You know what? They might got it. It feels about the same, but I'll give them that. So they got me on bend radius, but it's kind of a tie. So let's run down now the efficiency, the friction, and the stiction of these guys. So first, let's do the efficiency and the lash. So let's turn them all the way over. I'm gonna push on this end, and there we go. So that's movement you get inside the cable. Not ideal. They're great for what they work as great for a shift cable, but for someone who wants that feel where it's just it goes in. If you want your cable shifted trans to feel like a rod shifted trans, this is not going to do it for you. It's inherent in the cable. So then if we look at friction, there's quite a bit, right? So you don't feel that because realistically the cable's like this in the car, but that's still a substantial amount of friction. And as you can see, it's popping in and out, and that's because there's stiction, right? And I'm pushing straight in, and there's no angle. So we've just got stiction, right? So that's not ideal either. So I get the points for efficiency, friction, and stiction. So comparing the rod ends, they're not a huge difference in performance, but I don't make parts that are just good enough. So my stuff kind of has to be designed perfect. what does a shift cable do? It translates motion. So how do you want to translate motion? I want to do it with no stiction. I want 0 lash, and I want it to feel good. And then I want the cable to package. So the feel good part is where they come in for me. These rod ends work. They're great. But I don't know so much about these, because these come out and they get stuck, right? These cannot get stuck. If you bend them a lot, they're harder to push in, but they don't get stuck ever. Now, just objectively speaking, the rod ends on my cables are higher quality rod ends. They have tighter tolerances. They have more degrees of freedom at the expense of cost. So they are a lot more expensive. I could have just done these. That would have been easy, but it's not what I wanted to do. Because the thing is even though these don't move much, they do move a tiny bit, and that kind of adds friction. So I'm going to give it to myself again on the rod ends. However, personally, I do like these bulkheads. They're great. They're awesome. Couple issues is, so they're designed to use the clip, which is great. Everybody hates the clip. You break your knuckles. You can't get it off. You can't get it on. But the screw-on's really nice. Now, I don't know of anybody who had issues with these coming loose, so I won't speak to that. I also happen to know that aluminum and stainless aren't the best of friends over long periods of time. And you can get a little bit of corrosion between aluminum and the stainless. And I actually had to break out a pipe wrench to pull one of these bulkheads off because it hasn't been moved in about 8 years. And it was just full of corrosive powder. The other thing is, I don't think there is. It's a good design. You can clamp it, which is great. You can use the clips, which is great. I think the friction between the aluminum and the stainless is high enough that, you know, a locking mechanism isn't needed. So I am going to give them the point for the bulkheads. While mine are cool, they are cost and volume driven. I would like to make something like this, but I would really need to invest in getting probably 200 to 300 of these made, and then shipped to my cable supplier who assembles the core cable. But these are good. It's a good design. It was creative. It got the job done. I like it. So, I mean, I'm not trying to talk bad on anybody. It's just, I'm trying to sell a product. I gotta let my product speak for itself. And, I don't know, buy my stuff so I can make more really cool stuff. And I don't have a sign off yet, so we'll see you later. Sorry. Okay, there is one last thing worth noting. How do the 30-year-old broken plastic cables hold up? Now these cables work. The metal conduit's not broken, but if you lived near the ocean or somewhere real salty, that would probably be rusted through. These cables are still fully functional, but they're pretty beat up and they're 30 years old. So if we want to look at, you know, bending radius, it's similar. So the bending radius is pretty similar. These might actually be a little tighter, honestly. So these are kind of better for bending radius. But what really upsets me about these $400 race cables that the competitors make is they're not better than the OEM cables. They're actually worse, like frustratingly worse. And how I'm going to show that here is, so you saw what the efficiency and the stiction and the friction of unused, only installed. I don't know. I've had them in and out of the car. I don't know how many times, but they've been like that since day one. And the manufacturer, I reached out to the manufacturer, 8 years ago when I tried installing them, and they just kept telling me I broke them. And I'm like, well, I didn't break them. And over the last decade, I've heard many other people who kind of know what they're talking about in the industry being like, yeah, I had the same issue. It's not great because it was a lot of money. And so if you compare the race cables to the OEM, they should be better, right? Well, the same amount of friction as my cables, which is a good amount. You want some. Zero stiction, right? It just comes in and out, really light force. So your OEM cables, well, they fit, right? Bend radius, who cares, because they fit. But they're better for efficiency. They're better for friction. They're better for stiction. The rod ends, you could argue, aren't as good because, well, they're bushings. But, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. They're not as good because they're bushings. And then the bulkheads don't matter because they're OEM because they fit. So if people want to spend $400 or, $120 on the knockoff versions, that's great. You can do that. Whatever. It's fine. Support whatever companies you want to support. But just know that you're buying something that doesn't outperform OEM. And it's not just this one set. I have a couple friends locally who also have these cables. And I've posted videos probably on my Instagram previously kind of highlighting this a little bit. But it wasn't really a concern before because I wasn't trying to sell anything. But now I'm trying to sell these. Like, the supplier I get these from, these are aircraft grade cables. Like, and they need to be. Well, they don't need to be, sorry. They're just, they're really high quality cables. And I wouldn't say the cables are better than OEM because they perform the same. The stiction, the friction, and the efficiency is the same. And that's what you want, right? However, my rod ends are better. You might argue that, these will last longer, but also these are brand new, where the OEM ones aren't brand new. So I'm trying to meet or exceed OEM, and I do it with the cable, and I exceed it with the rod ends. So that's, I don't know. That was not short and sweet. I have no idea how long I've been out here. But I would appreciate the support, because the more stuff you buy from me, the more products I can produce. If we walk through the shop right here, I could probably pull 5 different products that I'm in the process of developing. I just don't have the funds. I've built this entire business with my own money, and I don't have any left. So hopefully you guys will keep buying my products. I guarantee manufacture and design defects. If I do something wrong and you buy a product from me, I want that fixed. I want my customers to be happy they bought something from me. I don't want my customers to be like, well, they're the only person who does it and they're a pain in the ass to work with, so whatever. No, I want my customers to be excited when they get a product, and I want them to be excited when it works. I don't know what has happened in the industry over the last 10 years, but it just seems like a lot of these big names are too cool for their customers, and they don't really care. And it's really frustrating. It's a good thing for me because I've spent 13 years of my career and, 5 years of college before that to get to where I am in my career, which is a very good place. And I'm trying to not throw it away, but I want to build race cars and I want to build race car parts, and I'm good at it. So that's kind of all I want to do, and I can't do it unless people put faith in me and put faith in my products, and I will stand by it. If these things break, I got a couple methods to make them stronger, but if it's an issue, I will cut them out of billet. I will figure some. It won't look like this because this is expensive, but I will make metal ends that are more robust. I don't suspect I'll need to because I've done some testing, and this stuff is wildly strong for what it is. Like, for example, this pin doesn't even lock into the bulkhead. It locks into the cap, but then there's a slot, and this stuff is so stiff that once this is locked into place, it won't come out at all. So you don't have to worry about it falling off. I don't know what else to say. I've said too much. Support me. I'm going to try to put more YouTube videos up. Unfortunately, I've got to go to Italy for a month or two. I don't know how long. I booked a flight for a month, but apparently I'm staying there till we hire someone new. So unfortunately, as soon as I launch these sweet cables, I will be out of business for a month or two. But I will be planning on putting together a run of 50 sets when I get back in February. So I will be making these cables. I have 10 sets for CBs, and they fit the CB shifter and the RSX shifters. When I get back, my rod ends that I'm going to use for the 9mm post on the Prelude and the CD and the CL. So I will have cables available for all Preludes, and I have short throw shifters available for, well, not available yet. I'll build some. But I will be covering all HF platforms for shifters and shift cables. So support your local business.